Welcome to The Humans Who Powered Your Algorithm. Please welcome to the stage Nikita Patel.
Hello, everybody. Good morning. So, make some noise if you're staying at this hotel and you've been up since the crack of dawn. So, this morning was quite entertaining, but we are glad that you are here with us, and I'm very excited to introduce this discussion today. So, my name is Nikita Patel, and I oversee leadership programs at Newmark J School at CUNY. I also currently serve on ONA's board of directors, and I'm secretary of the organization too. It brings me great joy to, thank you. It brings me great joy to introduce this session because curation is very near and dear to my heart, having worked at Twitter myself and with some of our esteemed speakers as well. So without further ado, let me introduce the session. So the title is The Humans Who Powered Your Algorithm, the Untold Story of Big Tech, Curation, Content, and Editorial Teams. It's no secret that every platform has human curators. And as curators and journalists who's led these teams, they've been far too quiet for too long. So today, I'm excited to hear some real talk and some constructive feedback and solutions from these folks. They'll explain how they've kept watch over the algorithms, and they'll share valuable lessons about the integration of AI as well. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome our panelists to the stage. First, we have my former friend and colleague, or should I say, formerly, sorry. She is not a former friend. I was going to make a joke about the platform formerly known as Twitter. My goodness. Joanna Geary, welcome to the stage. Carolyn O'Hara from Pocket Mozilla. Rachel Richardson from Snap. Gigi Zhang, formerly from Google. And our esteemed moderator, David Smidra, formerly from the platform known as Twitter. So you got it right then. And now currently at Politico, who is also ONA's president. All right. Once the conversation gets going, if you have questions for these folks, please use the conference app or the website to submit your questions. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. We're glad that everyone, that all is well, that all is okay. I also want to give a shout out to the ONA staff that once again proves it is ready for everything, all of the unpredictable stuff that happens at our conference. And also just got the note that apparently both elevators are now open, so we are back. All right. I'm so excited. I think we're all excited to have this conversation today. As Nikita mentioned, this is actually a conversation that we've been having in back alleys and dark street corners for years, and it makes all the difference that we are now having this conversation on stage, and the ONA stage in particular. So actually to kind of kick us off and give a sense of how we started to connect the dots, I just wanted to go down the line and mention the first time that we each met, I guess, one another, and realized that there were humans doing this work at other tech companies. So Carolyn, would you lead us off?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming today. So excited to have this conversation. I think I'd known that there were folks at other platforms, and I'd met a couple in passing, folks at Apple News or Smart News Upday. But it was earlier this year, actually, when Joe and I got coffee, and I hate to say it was kind of like a therapy session, where we really started to kind of mind meld and talk about the challenges and opportunities and the cool work that our teams had done and the overlap between them. And so I don't know, I credit my connection with Joe for really putting this together, and I've actually hired someone that she used to work with in the past, so it's just been an incredible start to this cool web.
For me, I knew Joanna from a former life. We both worked at News Corp together. And so when I started doing what I was doing at Snap, she had been at Twitter for a long time. And I reached out, and we held hands ever since and exchanged notes. And swapped war stories. And I think you actually do need a sort of an emotional support friend when in these roles, and Joanna was mine.
Thank you. You were mine too. I was going to say, if you're talking about who I met, who ended up working in curation first, it was definitely Rachel in a London tiki bar at a News Corp Christmas party, if I remember rightly. But in terms of finding someone, just making that connection in this space, it was, so I've been in this space since 2015. It was 2018, and it was at O&A, and it was David.
Ditto. Yeah, I met David almost 7 years ago at Google, actually, when our team first started, and you were the first curation person I met.
Yeah, and likewise, because so we thought yesterday as we were doing this that I thought it was Joanna in 2018, but it turned out it was Chi-Chi, because you had curated at Flipboard earlier, a couple years earlier than that. And as I was trying to build a curation team for a Google product, I looked at Flipboard as like this shining beacon of like how it should be done in terms of like the co-founders were both from tech and content, and they had staffed curation, and finding someone who was on that team was like a massive discovery. So we're gonna get into it. Emotional support has already been mentioned, but we do have like the level setting. The goal for this conversation is to open up and put on the record, I think, things that we should have been talking about openly in this industry for a while. It will not be our therapy session, though we may go there here and there. But we really want to get to a place where we have, can start a constructive conversation, especially as we're going in to this era of AI, and like what are the lessons and the insights that we were able to pull from this work that can set us up for that. And so just wanted to show kind of, again, the example of how this work is really, it's certainly, I think, swelled and maybe crested, but it's certainly not disappeared at all. Carolyn, you're still doing this work at Pocket. But all of these companies have staffed curation teams at one point or another. Even YouTube back in 2010, or excuse me, before then, 2006, 2005, just as they were getting started, that's how the YouTube homepage was populated, was a team of curators that were identifying the best content that was on the platform, right? So, but we've never had this conversation together about how we approach that work and what it entailed. So let's get that going right now. And Carolyn, would you lead us off with the work you do at Pocket?
Absolutely, thank you. I think of Pocket as actually like a pretty interesting product in this space, because not only do we have humans doing curation, but Pocket itself is very much a curation platform. Our millions of users have downloaded this product that allows you to save things to read later. They're essentially curating the internet for us. And that's a really powerful signal for us. And we use that data and those insights in terms of what people are saving, what they're engaging with, anonymously and in aggregate, to kind of get a signal on what's super interesting. And I think the save signal is actually particularly interesting because it is so distinct from the like. I think like can be very public and very performative, and saving something is very kind of personal, and it means you might want to like come back and wrestle with it. So the signal that we get is particularly interesting, I think. We use that to inform all of the curation that we do. And so what you see on the screens here are a couple of manifestations of that. And it works differently we have a whole suite of editorial products, and it works differently with each one. Our Pocket Hits daily email, which some of you might get, it's a largely manually curated email that goes out to, everyone gets the same one each day, but it's informed by what our users are saving. In other respects, some of the other experiences that we see, we're doing more, the humans in the loop are informing the algorithm or improving the algorithm, doing kind of content intelligence. And that manifests across a lot of different surfaces. We power recommendations into Firefox, not just in the US, but 7 different markets around the world. So we're doing that not just in English, but in 5 different languages as well.
Great. And Joanna, talk us through moments and trends on Twitter, or formerly known as Twitter.
Oh, formerly known as Twitter. Yes, I will talk through moments and trends and all the work of curation, which before it was dramatically disbanded in November 2022, was a team of 130 people across 11 different time zones, operating and curating in 10 different languages, and I couldn't be more proud of having the chance to work with those amazing individuals. Some of the point of curation was to bridge the gap between what people expected and wanted Twitter to do and what it actually could do. And ideally to use the abilities of our team to then eventually be able to do that in an automated and scaled way. The visible stuff, the most visible stuff from our team is the stuff that you're seeing on the screens, trying to solve discovery problems with things like events and moments, context problems with what you can see are very much missed trend descriptions, and then also other things that maybe weren't quite as visible. So things like work helping to uplift credible information around like highly areas with high misinformation, topical categorization of tweets, and various other pieces of work that involved humans in the loop. So that was us.
Great. I mean, we'll keep going through this, but I also want to keep calling out themes of, it was an international operation. It was kind of built on a production desk method or model. And you can see in the top commentary screenshot in the middle there, that was a feature that kind of blended the recommendations of the accounts that were relevant to a given story, but then the algorithm then surfaced the tweets from those accounts. So you started to get this blend of human and machine kind of working compatibly. So great. Rachel, take us through Snap.
Sure. So for Snapchat, the editorial function, which I managed, had a dual purpose. We were a walled garden. That has actually changed a little bit since I left in 2021. But we essentially selected partners to be part of Discover, as it was then known. And the other part of our role was also organizing content into topics, which we called collections. So things like wild weather events, the Met Gala, elections. We would essentially surface that content to the top of the feed so that, something that we thought was a very important event for our users would be very visible because the rest of it was algorithmically sorted. And then we also had some ability to be able to control whether our users saw breaking news. So if something really dramatic had happened, like, I don't know, a former president getting indicted and having a mugshot, we would be able to make sure that that piece of content that was very fresh and timely was incredibly high on this essential feed, and sort of essentially counted against the algorithm that was optimized for engagement. Excellent. Okay, and then you'll see two Google examples here because there were two kind of stages of evolution in our team at Google that Chi-Chi and I worked on. So the first one really emphasized our ability to structure the experience and the product around different stories and moments. And so you can see the 2018 midterm here. You can see the different tabs for latest stories, coverage of the Senate races, the House races, the individual states, and then you go into those states and you can see the gubernatorial coverage and their specific Senate and House races. And so that structure and then the algorithms that kind of powered it, our manager at the time, our engineering director, MIT grad, serial startup entrepreneur, engineering director at Google, he would go around and show this to his colleagues and say, there is no AI on the planet that could build this. Like the idea that we could actually structure this experience and then have the algorithms populate it was kind of a breakthrough for us. And what we're particularly proud of is our team was adamant that this is a US election. It is essential to have access to the information of civic value. So even though you can't look at a chart of traffic and say that on that basis a Spanish language version is justifiable from pure traffic standpoint, we insisted on it. And so our team put that together as well. And so we were proud of that experience. But then Chi-Chi, you were instrumental in kind of taking our team, I think, to like another stage of how we could work with engineering and improve the product. Can you talk us through this?
Yeah, so I think that was closer to the halfway point before I parted ways with Google earlier this year, and that was in about 2019 where we evolved as a team from this role as curators to become more as consultants and closer to almost product managers in that regard. And this is a particular project that I'm proud of where I worked very closely with engineers to design and surface in-depth reporting from a variety of different sources. And the idea was to, highlight investigative reporting and in-depth reporting beyond the headlines of what we were seeing in the Google News feed. And so from the beginning ideation stage of working very closely with engineers to determine what goes into the signals that we were using and the considerations that had to be made. And those were the people that I was working with did not have an understanding of journalism or journalistic principles. So it was a really great partnership, and being able to do that time and time again going forward was how our team evolved and added more value to the product at scale.
And so if scale was on your bingo card, that just got hit, because I think that was something that came up for all of our teams, and I'm sure it comes up in your work, Carolyn, is the ability to take this editorial knowledge and expertise, and inevitably we would run into an engineer or an engineering leader and say, but how does that scale, right? And so I think that takes us to our challenges section, which is, these are great examples of what the work looks like now, and some of our I think, kind of showcase moments, but we didn't get there overnight. So to kind of open this up, this is a pretty big moment that happened shortly after a lot of our teams were formed. So in spring 2016, if you'll recall, there was a pretty big kerfuffle at Facebook. They had a trends curation team, and there's a story that came out that someone on that team, as an anonymous source, alleged that there is a process, or a culture rather, of kind of promoting liberal content and downranking or shadow banning conservative content, right? And so that I refer to as the specter that I think loomed over a lot of our work, and also you can kind of see this on the right. That mindset I think is still there. I apologize for the small point size, but Alex Heath on Threads a few weeks ago just asked, openly, how will Threads, handle news? And Adam Mosseri from Meta essentially said it won't. The goal is not to replace Twitter. We want to have all communities here, right? And so we don't want to focus just on news. We want all sorts of community content. And fair enough, but I don't know that that's a decision that a platform is in control of, right? It's the audience that decides how to use it. And so I'd like to get to this question of kind of how our teams were formed and what we understood the charter to be when those teams were formed. So instead of going down the line, I'll just kind of open it up, and I'm curious for Joanna, did you?
Sure, I mean, it was wild. It was wild. There's some people in the audience who were there a little bit before I was, but who might correct me later. But I think, we were brought in. I think, I talked earlier about curation existed because there was an expectation of what technology could do on Twitter, and sometimes that couldn't be done. And so the humans would bridge the gap. And that's exactly why we were brought in. We were brought in because there was a discovery problem on Twitter and a desire for people to want to follow along with big events live. And so a number of engineers got together and came up with what seemed like a really, really cool automated solution to that during a hack week, and it got sponsored by the CEO and got built out. And I think somewhere along the line of building out, they realized they couldn't actually do that in a fully automated way, and that it was going to need humans, and it needed humans in a wild amount of ways. So not only did it need humans to curate these things called moments and pull them together, but also the live discovery required humans to sit there and watch a live feed of tweet and select them in real time to push them to you. So I remember a lot of at times just during the Olympics, just sitting there on my sofa, just pushing tweets to people. So it was very, very manual at the beginning. Over time, we did go on the same journey that Chi-Chi was talking about around towards automation and using intelligence to actually provide humans in the loop. But it started there, and that became a theme, I think. We continued to bridge those gaps.
Rachel, I'm curious, at Snap, you mentioned it was a walled garden and it was a partner-driven experience. Could you kind of talk through how your team was, the remit your team was given to make sure that was a strong experience?
Sure, yeah. very much sort of judged on what we deemed internally as like editorial excellence, which was essentially like selecting the right partners that would be able to produce for the platform and do a really good job, helping those partners, sharing with them best practices, platform trends, that kind of thing. And then essentially, I think the key part of our role, which sits in the curation part, was almost like fighting the algorithm, which, as I said earlier, was optimized for engagement, which meant that it didn't always give the best experience at the right time, if that makes sense. And so, you know, we were sort of empowered with similarly, can I swear? Shit
Yes.
tools. I mean, yeah, we were given some really shanky bits of equipment and software and tools to essentially try and make sure that at moments, particularly around news or particularly around things like the Super Bowl or the Met Gala or the Olympics is actually a really good example, to make sure that things felt fresh. And I think that's always, probably still to this day from my experience as a user at Snap, is it's never quite figured out the fresh part of making that feed feel really fresh and new and relevant and recent. And so that was where we really intervened with really shanky tools.
It resonates so much, this like phrase, bridging the gap, because I think that is this common misconception that I had before going, that the algorithms were going to be so good that they were going to be able to provide this really fantastic experience. The algorithms are good. They're getting better all the time. But it's the work of teams like ours who are improving them and influencing them and bridging the gap where they aren't producing the right kind of experience to meet your company's mission and values. And I feel really fortunate. Pocket is part of Mozilla. Like, we are not optimized for engagement. That is not, like, we do not chase clicks. We actually want to provide a really cool, balanced, interesting content environment, and that feels great. What I also hear as you all talk is like, it kind of starts, like the seed of the team starts in this like bridging the gap. We need to provide this cool experience to users. And then over time, you start to wear so many hats, you're just covered in hats. And it becomes, you're helping build tools. You're working with engineering teams to build improved tools. You are on the front lines of better understanding and getting user insights, not just from your own market, but from markets around the world, and bringing those back to the product teams to provide an international perspective for engagement and what's interesting. Your partner, you're the bridge from your company to the media industry, because most of your team has worked in newsrooms, and folks in tech companies often haven't. And you can be a really great advocate internally for understanding the challenges in the journalism industry and feed back to tech companies what are pain points in the industry and like how you might be able to develop products and solutions for the media industry that would get better content in front of more people.
Just wanted to jump in and like underline that. Like, I agree. Like, there were so many times where our team was able to stop a predominantly US-centric engineering team from doing something that would have really upset people in other countries around the world. It was, and I think that's like from talking to you guys often, like the curation teams are the most international teams within product if they are lucky enough to sit in products. And I think that is such a superpower for organizations that have them, because there is a lot of clouded thinking around how to serve international audiences often when everything's so centralized in the US.
Yeah, I wanted to add that I think it's fair to say from the very beginning, our team was an experiment. And an experiment meaning that we weren't full-time employees of Google. We were contractors, meaning that we didn't have job security. So at any given time, your contract could be terminated. Luckily, the experiment was a success. But the backdrop of that was two very difficult challenges that we had to overcome. One was organizational, and the other was cultural. And anytime you're trying to run an experiment that is not necessarily against, but so vastly different from the culture and the organizational setup of a company, it's going to be really hard. And we had a lot of growing pains, especially in the early days of that. Everything all of you said with the evolution resonated with me, but it required a lot of learning and work on our team's part to, I think, get to where we eventually ended up. But trying to change a culture of 200,000 employees that is very, very end-driven, and an organization where our team actually sat with engineering, but we weren't engineers. And we were closer to product management, but we didn't sit with product managers either. So when we were working or trying to work with partners on UX and product and eng, they didn't know how to work with us, and it was oftentimes a struggle.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that kind of description, and I think it resonates also with remarks earlier that our teams often were kind of identified as the team that could do so much of this work that was, from a tech perspective or a tech company perspective, undefined, right? So tech companies have a PM job ladder, they have a UX designer job ladder, they have an engineer job ladder. There was no curator, editorial specialist job ladder, except I think at Twitter we had the curator ladder.
Eventually.
I
spent a long time working on it.
And even when I was trying to hire curators at Twitter, I'd work with a recruiter and they'd say, "What do you mean curator job ladder?" So it wasn't as ingrained. But I mean, to Chi-Chi's point, like, it was, I think these things go together, where our work and our expertise was not understood, so it was staffed and drawn upon from a bag of money to hire contractors, as opposed to a defined function in the company, in the industry. And I think we all kind of have lived through that.
Yeah, I would say one of my proudest, anyone who's in management out there, that some of your proudest moments no one else gives a damn about, right? Like, no one really cares. But one of the things I really cared about was working to convert our team from contractors to full-time staff, and to bring that sense that we were actually a team of specialists that you needed in a company like Twitter. But it was really hard. I remember, one person in my team coming to me and say, "Why is it I'm the only one in a meeting that has to introduce my name and my team and then what that team does? And I have to give a full introductory presentation every single time. And it hasn't stopped, and I've been here years." And it's just because, teams move around, they change, and people didn't have experience of our team and what it did. And that was always a problem. It made things harder. It made that culture change harder. I think another thing that made the culture change harder is, and I think, again, people in news understand this, content has this terrible Dunning-Kruger effect, because people are swimming in content all the time. They think they understand how it gets to them, how it's made, the thought behind it, and that is exactly true of everyone who works in tech companies as well. And so they weren't really aware of what they didn't know. And a really good example of this is, I think it was maybe 48 hours before the launch of Moments in 2015, there was an edict that came down from Jack Dorsey, who said, "It's going to be a cleaner product if all your headlines only have 3 words in them." And so if you ever remember the launch of Moments, we did indeed launch with only 3 words in the headlines, which somewhat undermined the discovery capabilities of the product for about maybe a week, until it was reversed. And again, that was it was a very well-meaning person who understood product and understand that lots of words looks messy and you want to streamline your product and create that white space, and he understood design. He just didn't understand content. And you have to take the entire company on that journey, and that's hard, especially if you're predominantly contractors.
I think, can I just chime in here as well? I think the whole contractor sort of full-time employee thing is really fascinating, and I had a lot of contractors in my team, which I felt very uncomfortable about. But I do think at the heart of the issue is this very strange thing with tech companies, and I think particularly going back to this issue of the spectre, where they never wanted to admit that they had journalists in the building. And they never wanted to admit that there was an editorial team because that meant there were people with leathers and people doing things in some mysterious room somewhere. And that was always, to me, just so odd. And I understand the politics and the comms of it all, but it was just so bizarre that they like to point to oh, but we do have journalists that work in the team. But we were never really given that much of an opportunity to explain what we did or what the work was, because I think it was always really, there was always a really big concern that it would be misconstrued. Because I think as soon as you start saying, oh yes, we do curate things into topics, then you do get the sort of theories from different sides of the political spectrum that you're actually trying to manipulate the audience in some way. And I don't think that's what my team did at all in any of the powers that we had to, elevate content. But that was always the concern.
Yeah, yet there's nothing more mysterious than an engineer working on an algorithm on their own time and coming up and saying, hey, I've discovered breaking news. We can just use this on the front end, right? But that's not how people think. And so there was often way more oversight on our teams than there were on anyone building discovery algorithms on the platform. Yes, discovery algorithms would go through a test and approved process, but they would often be tested out in the wild.
Yeah, and I think this distinction that has emerged now, that has become clearer between trust and safety work, which is identifying the toxic stuff, the unhealthy stuff, and actioning on it appropriately, and curation work or editorial work. I mean, it certainly wasn't clear in my mind in 2015, 2016, because we were managing teams that were seeing all of it, and so we often came across so much of that content. But I don't think it was clear to the people around us either, like the charters that we had as teams. And so I think that's been one distinction that's surfaced over time. But it's about finding that common language and understanding where the gaps, Carolyn, as you were mentioning, where those gaps are and what are the strengths of each team to fill those gaps. So I want to get around as well to, we've talked about TVCs or temps, vendors, contractors, and how we had, that's how we started. I also want to talk about job titles and what we called this work. Carolyn, since you are still doing this work and you have a team, start us off, but maybe has there been some evolution there in terms of what you've called your team or what you've been asked to call your team?
So much evolution, and we are nothing if not wordsmiths, right? So, and to your point earlier, there aren't defined. I mean, there aren't defined ladders at these companies, and it is still a work in progress. Like when you go to open up new roles, it is a bit of a circuitous journey on occasion. It's not something that HR is immediately like, oh yes, I understand this profile, and so. Our team, we sit on the content team. That has been called a number of different things over the years. And if you go to different people in the company today, I'm sure they would call us the curation team or the editorial team or the content discovery team. So it's all a bit of a journey. And ultimately, I think that's a big part of what I do in many respects is advocating for the work that we do, showcasing our successes and how we can plug in and how we can improve these products constantly. I don't try to get too hung up on what we're called, though, it's easier sometimes when you can get something distinct so that you can get time with product and engineering teams. But I think our path to success has been showing our successes, showing how we can create better products for end users, and that's ultimately what I think we do. But we're called content now, which. Define as you like.
Got it. Rachel?
Yeah, I was the head of editorial in an editorial team that was part of a content and partnerships team. So we were pretty straight shooting, I'd say. And from the get-go, we were like that. We definitely had some issues with ladders. That actually, I'd forgotten about that, and now that it's all come flooding back to me.
Sorry about that.
I know. We did get there in the end. But it was always incredibly difficult to try and figure out what a career path looked like for someone in content, because it really did stop somewhere midway down the sort of overall chart, because that person was never going to become the VP of engineering.
So we started out being editors and editorial for a couple of months until our legal team found out that's what we were calling ourselves and then asked us not to. And then we became Curation and curators after that. So it got a bit messy for a while. And curator, we needed to work hard to get everyone to really accept the word curator. A lot of people who were coming in for news were like, that is not what I am. I am editorial. But I'm glad we did, not least because a couple of years later I discovered that there were a lot of very high-level executives that don't know the difference between editorial and editorializing in word definitions. And so editorial to them kind of reinforced the spooky cabal of people who had opinions that they were placing out into the world. So curation was really great for us because it gave us like this slight gap. It wasn't I think we were in discussion about changing the team's name. No one knew that, I think, at the time, but into content intelligence, because ultimately, like, going back and referencing
that's
the
quite
content
sexy.
it sounded...
Content intelligence.
So, in full disclosure, I stole that from Netflix because they call their function content intelligence. Yeah.
So we were going to steal that from Netflix. Thanks, Netflix.
The same answer, actually, as Joe, because you talked about the editorialization and any whiff of that at Google. I think we would have preferred to call ourselves editorial. That would have been just right on what we were doing, but that term just was, people were not having it. So there were a couple of options, obviously, curation, content strategy, and ultimately landed on product experience because our job was to build a great product experience for our users, but also our publishers, and that's what we landed on. But I think the hard part is that actually doesn't mean anything to anyone at Google, so it still required a lot of explanation of what is it that we do, what are our skills, and
yes, and some of the backstory here that so at the time, we were going from being the editorial team for a previous product called Google Play Newsstand. We were reorged into Google News to help become the new Google News. Google News is a search property, so all the principles and the constraints are different. So we could not call ourselves editorial anymore. And it was about a 6-month endeavor, saga, journey of trying to figure out what to call ourselves. And I will forever feel terrible for Chi-Chi and the rest of the team that had to endure that because I had no answer for them. I couldn't get an approved answer for our team. And at one point, I flew out to King's Landing or Mountain View and got time with the engineer VP who would be the decider on this. And I put a slide deck up and I proposed editorial strategist. And the whole meeting took a left turn. We kind of went back and forth. And then, as we're closing the meeting, just one of those things you say is like, okay, thanks, I'll send you the slides and we can follow up. He says, no, David, do not send me these slides. I don't want these in my inbox. I want you to print this out and burn it. And that goes back to, this was within a year of what you see on the screen. The anxiety was so high around, at a company level, the perception, never mind the reality and the nuance of the work we did, the perception of having editorially minded people being used as a cudgel against us, right? And so even having it in our Google Drive was seen as a liability. Yeah.
My life would have been so much easier if I was allowed to be influencing the content in manipulative and malicious ways. That would have been a lot easier. The job was so locked down and you were under such scrutiny internally because of that fear. That when people turn around and say, oh, you were just there deciding whatever content you wanted to put up and it was great, it just makes me laugh because the stress of the job came from that oversight.
Yeah. Great. So I'm going to do a plug here as we're kind of approaching the final third. If you have questions and you want to put them into the app, we'll have Nikita reviewing those and kind of sending those to us at the end. But let's get to some of the lessons and the takeaways from doing this work. And I wanted to show here kind of a you can see a tweet from Versha right after the events of early November, in which the Curation team, along with 3,500 colleagues at Twitter, were laid off. And you notice 18,000 likes, right? I don't think that recognition of Curation's work and value on the platform, it certainly wasn't there on day one, it wasn't there a couple years in, but by the end it certainly was, right? And then if you look at kind of a thread I captured from Ezra Klein, who many of you may know has been covering AI and I think more broadly kind of curation and content for a couple years now with pretty intense focus, just expresses this desire for the curatorial internet versus the algorithmic internet. And I thought that really nicely captured what the audience is expecting, what the audience wants, in this validation that it can't just be about pushing down the bad stuff. It's got to be about contextualizing and promoting and pushing forward the best stuff, right? And finding a way to do that. So for this section, I'd like to ask kind of what was an aha moment, maybe, where your team finally hit pay dirt or struck gold, and you found that engineering colleague or that PM who it could have been a product launch, it could have been an insight where you started to speak a common language. Can any of you think of a moment that comes to mind?
2020. And the pandemic started. There was a summer of social justice protests, and it was just this moment when people craved high quality information with context from people they felt like they could trust. And you didn't, and all of a sudden you were like, who is the pandemic expert? And who is the underserved voice that needs to be elevated because they can actually speak to this really trying moment? And the content team was the one that we kind of pioneered these rapid collections where we'd go out and find experts and elevate them and push them through our recommendations to have them to get their human voices into our recommendations. And that was when I think the whole company was like, that's a value add. Like that helps us, and Mozilla's distinct too because we have a manifesto, we have a mission, like we have ideas about what the healthier internet looks like and what healthy content on the internet looks like, and that was able to push forward our mission, and that was when we started to get tooling resources and the rest, and that was a really great proud moment. We've ended up continuing that now has become like a flagship editorial product for us, where we work with individual experts, subject matter experts and curators, and make these really fantastic collections, and they are a huge part of what we do today. And so that really felt like that moment in time that came out of need really unlocked that for us.
Yeah, I would agree, actually. Never has something moved up the priority list like the pandemic. Like products that I was asking for years were suddenly available within like a few days. And I was like, aha, you can do it. It just
only took a global pandemic.
It took a global pandemic. But yeah, it was really interesting. And in as much as that was positive, it did also feel quite negative because it was like, oh right, you just like didn't believe me before or something, or like this need was not like you, or I hadn't communicated the need enough, or you hadn't understood the need enough. But yeah, there was a primal fear within not only Snap, I think it was every company, right, that they would be responsible for spreading misinformation, and that would actually result in people dying. And so, yeah, the idea that we could create collections around, life-saving health information for young people was really important, and it galvanized, lots of different parts of the company to come together to produce ways for us to curate. And everyone was so comfortable with that in a way that, there had been some expressions of discomfort around before, but they're like, oh yeah, health information, yeah, that's great. And obviously the pandemic became an incredibly divisive subject as time went on. But if you go back to March 2020, there was a sense of unity that I felt anyway, that we were like, oh yeah, we should actually have information from the World Health Organization. It's going to help people. So yeah, pandemic for me too.
I think real change takes a long time. And I can't say that's, completely happened at Google, but I think we made a lot of headway. And there were many aha moments, I think, throughout my time there, but it was a lot of the change that happened over time. It wasn't necessarily, I think, one moment in particular. And our team, I think what we found, so starting off in a place that was frustrating as contractors and challenging, I think we quickly learned that we need to learn what the interests and the language of our key stakeholders and who they are within the organization if we actually want to get work done, right? And so we did that work. And in addition to that, we also brought on journalists that we, love, and were very strong voices. Like Maria Ressa came to speak, and we had a monthly speaker series that we did. And over time, especially toward the end, this was something that was reflected, the change was something that was reflected in not only the people that we hired that came from newsrooms, whether they were UX or product managers or engineers, but also in the types of ideas that were seeded and spread throughout the organization. So, for example, after talks, it would really get, people inspired about, well, they talked about this problem. What can we do as Google to help them and change them? Because they really did care, but I definitely think that took time.
I would echo the idea that it takes time, and I think can I briefly talk about two aha moments? One was something that took a long time, and that was having this team inside of Twitter and thinking that my focus was to try and convince everybody at the company about the value of this team and to talk to them about it. I realized suddenly that actually our role was to understand them and their language. And we'd been trying to convince them of our value using our language. And so we ended up taking on some pretty meaty projects, teaching the team product development principles and also data literacy. And we ran quite a lot of work to get people to understand what it takes to instead of just having an idea, having a hypothesis and going and testing it and then getting buy-in for it and so on as per tech companies. That really helped to change. Once we changed our language, that helped how we worked with people. And then I think like a very recent aha moment was again something that was a long time in the making, but as anyone who works in change knows, when something good happens, you grab it and then you tell everyone about it as much as possible to try and make more of it happen. And we had for a long time known that placing humans in the loop of certain types of algorithms would, we believed, strengthen those algorithms and improve the output. But we weren't necessarily getting buy-in directly from the machine learning teams. And so we did put a huge amount of effort, David came on board as well, to try and help to build the case for that. And one of the areas where we think that's really important is in the area where you have to over-index on something called precision, which is getting the right stuff out of the algorithm, and recall, which is getting stuff out of the algorithm. So when it's high precision, we could offer a benefit. And we managed to do a piece of work with our trust and safety teams around out-of-network push notifications. And we were looking to reduce the amount of tweets with misinformation that were being pushed to people who didn't ask for them. And we managed to do that with content intelligence in a way that reduced, in the US and Brazil, reduced that happening by millions and millions and millions of impressions on tweets every month. And that was such an exciting moment for us. We were preparing to launch that worldwide, and we had seen that as something as a way to prove out humans in the loop are really valuable. And it would have been, but you'll have to believe me because we don't exist anymore.
Okay. So we'll turn to questions in a quick second. I want to kind of slide in my own aha moment, which was I discovered that the key to making a project happen for most of my time at Google running this team was finding the mid-level engineering manager who had written lots of code, managed other engineers, probably came from a startup, so had a very kind of rogue sense of rules that they could operate by and was not beholden to like the company level party line on a lot of these things. In other words, they saw the gaps, as we've talked about, and how we could fill them, and they would just code up a tool to help us do that. And then seeing that result, and you hold it up to the product and you're like, this is so much better, right? We'll turn to questions. I'll leave these up while we have questions. If you want to keep, studying this area, these are just kind of 3 directions you can go. If you haven't listened to Mia Quagliarello's Flipboard podcast on the art of curation, I cannot recommend it enough. It is just an exceptional body of work, and she's done a huge service interviewing curators from across multiple fields and domains. Michael Baskar's book is kind of the definitive book. And then Twitter had its own curation guidelines that are still on the site. Please visit them if you so choose. I cannot instruct you, but if you would like to save them while they're still there, you may do that. Because I think they are kind of a seminal series of documents for this work. So with that, Nikita, would you kick us off with questions?
Sure. We have many questions. Many, actually. I wish we could get to them all, but the first one I'd like to ask is from Tom from Fathom. So what does the decline or end of curation teams mean for the 2024 election? And what does it mean for the rest of the journalism industry that still relies on platforms for distribution?
Go ahead.
No, I don't. I feel like it's a Twitter question.
Well,
I can take it though if you want me to.
well, let me say this first. Curation teams haven't declined. The reason why there's a lot of former people on here is it's much easier for us to speak when we don't work for the companies anymore. But they are still there, minus Twitter. Twitter is another question, and I cannot speak to the current ownership's strategy, plans, vision for how this election is going to go. I wish them well. But curation is still a massive part of many platforms, and increasingly so. And I think what actually you're going to see is that newsrooms are going to end up working more closely with some of these teams, and also taking on curatorial roles that look and feel very similar themselves as different platforms start to become important to news.
The only thing I'd add there is that I think of all the major platforms, Twitter is going to be the outlier, but I do think Threads is really fascinating in how they are adopting this sort of no news approach. And one example that happened this week was something that Ron DeSantis said in the GOP debate, and I cannot quote it, but along the lines of sort of killing dead drug dealers crossing the border. Which was very threatening. The language that was used, that was anyone who posted that on Threads had it removed. And so it is going to be a really fascinating, and like as an armchair observer, I find it really fascinating to see what happens to Threads in this next year. But from a Snapchat perspective, there's still a lot of guardrails in place. I think from a Google perspective, I'm assuming you guys feel pretty confident there. And do you want to?
Well, I'd add, agreed on all these points. And it's absolutely not just a U.S. problem. It's 1,000% a global problem. I read a stat. There are 3 billion people voting next year. And you can be absolutely sure that is a stat that is known at tech platforms. That is huge reputational, product risk, brand risk. They do not want to be hauled in front of congressional committees. They are understanding the need and the problem, and they're, I believe, tackling it. And it's going to require teams like ours to help them tackle it.
I did see Twitter is currently hiring for an election threats analyst, if anyone is interested. I mean X, not Twitter. X is hiring.
All right, thank you all. So next question. As a social media editor who used to pitch Twitter moments, it always seemed like some outlets were favored in getting featured more than others. And I've always wondered if these places had deals with Twitter. Was that the case? I'm actually going to take this before I hand off, because that was my job. I was head of news partnerships for Twitter, and I will say that there were no deals. We just had an incredible amount of publishers, not only here in the US, but globally, right? Publishing moments, some publishers multiple moments on a daily basis. Like it was really quite incredible, inspiring, and probably a handful for the curation team to manage. And so the factors from a partnerships perspective were the freshness of moments, the relevance of moments. Were they not duplicative of the curation team's efforts? Were they complementary, right? Did they add more context, and were they rich media and things like that? There were many factors that I would train my partners in terms of curating in creating and pitching moments, and I'd love to turn it over to you all now.
Yeah, for Google Play Newsstand, there was a brief while that we were receiving pitches via Slack, which, by the way, the Apple News team does as well, and many of you may participate in that. But there were no deals from our side, and I'm just curious about Snap, because Snap was the model; it was a partnership.
Yeah, I mean, we did have deals, yeah. I can't speak to how it is now, but back in 2021, it was a walled garden. Partners were sort of accepted on a basis of editorial quality and balance. So there would definitely be issues where a really fantastic partner, but we'd be like, oh, we've actually got loads of this, and we actually need more of the other thing. Yeah.
And my hunch, Carolyn, with Pocket, since it's so user signal driven, that there's not a deal element to partners.
There's no deal element, no. We do have a syndication program wherein we license older, more evergreen content as a way to extend the long tail on really great content, and really just to build bridges with the media industry and elevate great content on the web. But no, we don't take pitches. We don't have deals.
Right. I think, go ahead, Joanna.
So Nikita mostly answered the question, but just as a little bit of a context, Twitter pivoted away from the Moments product pretty quickly. They decided the tool for discovery was really important, but they had kind of overbranded it. The CEO was leaving, and it was his big last hurrah, and I think they had overbranded it as a product rather than a feature. So there was a lot of engineering resource was spun out pretty quickly from that team, which meant that every submission from a news provider had to be manually placed into a certain position and various things done in some difficult tools to get them to be featured. So we tried to feature as many as we could, but it was a real pain in the ass. So sorry, yep. We did our best. Yep. The team worked hard.
All right, we have time for one more quick question and quick answer. Go ahead.
Okay, very good. So this one is from Andrew Fitzgerald.
Who's he?
Who is Andrew?
He's a plant.
For those who don't know, Andrew is the founder of the Curation team at Twitter.
Exactly. The father of curation at Twitter.
The George Washington of curation.
Yes. The question is, it seems inevitable that machines are a long way from understanding human content. Do you think the pendulum swings back for the content-based tech companies like Google and Meta, or do you think that engineers have finally won this battle?
Can I take that one?
Please.
Such a good question.
I spend a lot of my time telling people not to be scared of AI. And I don't mean that completely literally. I think we should be scared in the future. But I think it is completely overstated how powerful any of these things are right now, because I have seen how bad they are. And I have worked with machine learning teams, and I think if everyone could spend some time with an engineering team who are trying to create some sort of machine learning algorithm that in any way reflects human interest, like figuring out what funny looks like. It is a hot mess express of disaster. And so I think in the future, look, maybe it all ends incredibly badly, but as we sit here right now, I don't believe any of these things are that powerful to replace humans. That doesn't get away from the very sticky situation of where the humans fit with the algorithms. I don't have any answers for that either, but I feel quite strongly that it's never as good as they say it is.
Can I just really say we've got to stop the pendulum from frickin' swinging? If the pendulum stopped swinging between humans and algorithms and we actually worked on stuff from the beginning, blending the two, it would work really well. We know it could work really well. So I'm just please, someone stop that frickin' swinging.
Yeah, I don't think it's not a win-lose. Yeah. It's what do the humans do best? What are the contextualization, packaging, content understanding, the editorial brain that you can still bring to add serendipity and delight into these products is something that the machines can't do. Machines can help a lot. They can make it way better. They can scale it. They can make it personalization. They can understand the data, and it's just so it shouldn't be an either or. I am still really compelled. I think everyone's shared that Ezra Klein tweet. I mean, it made the rounds in all of my Slacks. The curatorial internet is really interesting. People want that. And I think we have to look at what consumers are after and lean into that.
It is the coolest job in the world.
Yes.
When it works and you're collaborating with these people, it is the coolest job in the world. And I feel so privileged to have had a chance to do it.
100%. So Andrew, we reject the premise of your question, and it is a super cool body of work that we are excited to finally talk about, and that we are glad this conversation is out in the open, and we'll keep continuing. As a closing note, I didn't have time to put it into the slides, but I threaded at, that can't be the right language, Casey Newton of Platformer, who's reporting, many of you know, has covered this space for so long. And I asked him what he would ask us if he were in the room today, and he simply responded, I think I would just say thank you for trying. So we'll leave it there. Thank you so much to all of you for attending. Thank you to our panel. Thank you to O&A for putting this conversation on the program.